I kept telling myself I shouldn't have let him carry my groceries. That thought looped in my head as I watched him unload the bags onto my kitchen counter. His muscles flexed with every movement, his body too damn tempting to ignore. He was younger than me, way too young, honestly, but the way he looked at me, like he could read every reckless thought racing through my mind, made it impossible to pretend I didn't feel something dangerous stirring inside me. Let me pause here for a second. You ever have one of those moments where you know you're crossing a line, but you just can't stop yourself? Yeah, that's where I was at. I'd known Ethan since he was a kid, my best friend's son. I'd watched him grow up over years of backyard barbecues, holiday dinners, and birthday parties. He'd always been polite, sweet, maybe a little shy. But now? Now he was a man. Broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw and eyes that held something I wasn't ready to name. It had been years since I'd really looked at him, and it hit me all at once that I wasn't the only one doing the looking. I didn't realize you did all your shopping alone, Ethan said, turning his head toward me as he pulled a bundle of lettuce from a bag. His voice had changed too, deeper, rougher, the kind of voice that made a woman's attention snap to him. I shrugged, leaning against the counter. I like to take my time. No one rushing me through the aisles. His lips curled into a smirk. I don't mind helping you. You shouldn't be hauling all these bags inside yourself. There was something about the way he said it, the way his eyes locked onto mine, that made heat crawl up my neck. I forced myself to ignore it, shaking my head with a smile. I managed just fine. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just kept unloading the bags, moving around my kitchen like he belonged there. It had been too long since a man had been in my space like this, moving easily, touching things, comfortable in a way that felt both familiar and new. And I hated how much I liked it. You don't have to keep standing there, I said, desperate to break the tension, to make it seem like I wasn't watching his every move. I don't mind, he replied, glancing up at me again, something knowing in his gaze. I like being helpful. Here's where I should have stopped it. Made some excuse, pushed him out the door with a polite thank you. But I didn't. I let him stay, let him linger in my kitchen, let him lean in a little closer when he handed me a bag of apples, his fingers brushing mine. He held my gaze, and I knew then, he was playing a game, testing me, waiting to see how far I'd let him go. I was old enough to know better, but that didn't mean I wanted him to stop. It's been a long time since I've seen you, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. Yeah, he agreed, watching me too closely. Mom says you've been busy. I swallowed. Life gets in the way. He nodded, but the way he looked at me made me think he wasn't buying my excuse. And maybe I wasn't buying it either. I'd kept my distance, sure, but it wasn't just because of life. It was because of moments like this, the kind I hadn't admitted to myself until now. Moments where I let my guard slip, let myself see what had been right in front of me all along. Ethan finished putting the groceries away, but he didn't step back. He stayed close enough that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, something clean and sharp that made my stomach tighten. I should have moved first, should have put space between us, but I didn't. I let the moment stretch, let the air between us grow thick with something unspoken. You okay? He asked, his voice low, a little rough around the edges. I forced a smile. Why wouldn't I be? His gaze dipped to my mouth for the briefest second before looking back up. Just making sure. I exhaled, reaching for the last bag, anything to break the tension, but he beat me to it, catching my wrist before I could move away. It wasn't a hard grip, just enough to make my breath catch, enough to send a sharp thrill through me that I had no business feeling. I looked up at him, searching his face for some sign that I was imagining this, but there was no hesitation in his expression, no doubt. Ethan, I started, but he cut me off. I think about you, he said, his voice steady, certain. More than I should. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. You shouldn't say that. Why not? Because it's wrong. Because he was my best friend's son. Because I wasn't some foolish woman who let herself get swept up in something reckless. But none of those words came out. Instead, I just stood there, his fingers still wrapped around my wrist, his body so close I could feel the warmth of him. My heart pounded, my head screamed at me to put an end to this, to step back before it was too late. But when I opened my mouth, what came out wasn't a protest. It wasn't anything at all. Because before I could say a word, he let go of my wrist and reached up, his fingers brushing along my jaw in a way that sent a sharp thrill through me. And then, just like that, the moment was over. "I should go," he said, his voice quiet now, like he was waiting for me to stop him. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to nod. "Okay." He lingered for a second, his eyes still locked on mine, and then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. I let out a shaky breath, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. My pulse was still racing, my body still thrumming with something dangerous, something I knew I shouldn't want. But I did. And I had no idea how I was going to stop myself from wanting more. Let me tell you, that night, lying in bed, my body was still charged, my skin still buzzing from the way Ethan had looked at me. My best friend's son. My best friend's grown, broad-shouldered, impossibly tempting son. I turned over, staring at the ceiling, frustrated at myself. It was nothing, a little flotation, a bit of tension. It would pass. I'd let it pass. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. The next morning, I woke up early, needing to shake the lingering haze from my mind. I busied myself with housework, scrubbing the kitchen counters, vacuuming rooms that didn't need it, anything to keep my thoughts occupied. But when my phone buzzed and I saw his name, my stomach tightened. "Ethan, you around today?" I hesitated for only a moment before replying. "Me, yes." "Why?" "Ethan, thought I'd stop by. Got something for you." I stared at the message. It was too early for this, for whatever game he was playing. I should have told him no, told him to keep his distance. But instead, my fingers moved on their own. "Me, sure." The knock came 20 minutes later. When I opened the door, he was standing there, holding a brown paper bag in one hand, his other tucked into his pocket. He looked casual, like this was any other visit, but his eyes told a different story. "I brought breakfast," he said, lifting the bag. "Hope you like bagels." I crossed my arms, trying to play it cool. "You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," he replied, his voice smooth, effortless. But I could feel the undercurrent beneath it. "Can I come in?" I should have said no. I should have made some excuse, told him. I was busy, but I stepped aside, letting him pass. He moved through my kitchen like he had the day before, setting the bag down and pulling out cream cheese and coffee he'd clearly stopped to pick up. He was making himself comfortable in my space again, and I hated how much I liked it. "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "Relax," he said with a smirk. "Just breakfast." I exhaled, taking a seat at the table. He joined me, peeling open his bagel and spreading cream cheese onto it with deliberate movements. My eyes flicked to his hands, then back to his face. He was watching me. "You didn't just come here to bring me breakfast," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. "No," he admitted. "I wanted to see you." I swallowed. "This isn't a good idea." "Why not?" "You know why." He leaned back, considering me. "I'm not a kid anymore." I laughed, shaking my head. "I never said you were. But you keep looking at me like you're trying to convince yourself of something." I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" Silence stretched between us, the air thick again, charged with something I didn't want to name. I stood, needing distance, but he was up too, stepping closer before I could react. "Tell me to stop," he said softly. I opened my mouth, ready to say it, but I didn't. And when he reached out, brushing his fingers along my wrist again, I knew I wouldn't. I let the moment stretch too long, letting my silence tell him everything. When he took another step closer, I didn't move away because I didn't want him to stop. The tension between us thickened, pulling us into something neither of us could ignore. He held my gaze, his fingers still ghosting over my wrist, waiting for a sign. Some part of me wanted to pull away, to break this before it went any further, but the larger part, the part that was losing control, wanted to see how far he would go. "Ethan," I murmured, not knowing what I was about to say, but my voice was different, softer, less sure. His grip tightened just slightly, his body inching closer. He smelled like fresh coffee and the crisp scent of morning air, and when his fingers moved to my elbow, the warmth of his touch sent a tremor through me. "You don't have to pretend," he whispered. I should have stopped this. I knew I should have. But I was exhausted from fighting what I had already lost. I exhaled, barely nodding, and he took it as the answer he'd been waiting for. His fingers traced up my arm, slow, testing, savoring. When they reached my shoulder, his other hand cupped my waist. My breath hitched as he leaned in, his lips a whisper away. Then, a loud knock on the door shattered the moment. I jerked back, my pulse racing. The spell between us was broken. He closed his eyes for a brief second before stepping away, his hands sliding into his pockets as if nothing had happened. But I saw it in his eyes, the same lingering hunger I was trying so desperately to hide. The knock came again, harder this time. I swallowed, forcing myself to move. When I opened the door, my best friend stood on the other side, smiling, oblivious to what had just been interrupted. "Hey," she said cheerfully. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." My stomach dropped. My best friend, Ethan's mother. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, her eyes immediately landing on Ethan, who had casually moved to the counter, picking up his coffee like nothing was out of place. "I didn't know you were here," she said, looking between the two of us with a smile. "Yeah," Ethan said smoothly. "I just stopped by to bring breakfast." Her eyes softened. "That's sweet of you." Then she turned to me. "So, what's new?" I forced a smile, my heartbeat still erratic. "Oh, you know. The usual." She settled into a chair, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Ethan's gaze flicked to mine, and in that moment, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Let me tell you, standing there, trying to act normal while my best friend chatted away, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I could still feel the warmth of Ethan's touch, the ghost of his fingers on my wrist. My pulse was racing, but I forced a smile, pushing away the temptation to glance at him. He, on the other hand, seemed perfectly calm, sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened. "Do you have any plans today?" she asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. "Nothing much. Just catching up on things around the house." She smiled. "You know, I was just talking to Ethan the other day about how nice it would be if we all got together soon. Like old times." Ethan didn't react, but I knew he was watching me. My hands felt clammy. "That sounds nice," I said, keeping my voice light, casual. She beamed. "Maybe a dinner next weekend? Just a small gathering." Ethan finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "That depends on her schedule, Mom." His mother turned to him with a small laugh. "You two act like you don't have time for a simple dinner. It's been forever since we've all been together." Ethan shrugged. "We'll figure something out." I nodded quickly, desperate to steer the conversation away from plans that involved prolonged time around Ethan. "Yeah, just let me know." She finally dropped it, reaching for a bagel from the bag Ethan had brought, completely oblivious to the heavy air in the room. I, on the other hand, felt like I was suffocating. Ethan was still too close. I could feel the heat of him even across the room. I needed an escape. "Well, I should get going," I announced suddenly. "I have a few errands to run." His mother looked surprised. "Oh, I didn't mean to intrude." No, I insisted, forcing a reassuring smile. "It's just little things I need to take care of." Ethan's eyes locked onto mine, as if he saw right through the excuse, but he didn't say anything. "Well, all right," his mother said, standing up. "I won't keep you." Ethan remained silent as I walked them to the door, my heart pounding with every step. When his mother stepped outside, I thought I was in the clear. But as Ethan turned to follow her, his hand brushed my lower back, just for a second. His touch was deliberate and slow, a warning, a promise. And then he was gone. I closed the door behind them, leaning against it with a heavy sigh. My skin still tingled where he had touched me. I should have been relieved that they were gone, that the tension had broken, but all I could think about was that touch, that silent message between us. This wasn't over. I spent the rest of the day trying to push it out of my mind, but it was useless. The thought of Ethan, his hands, the way he had looked at me, haunted me like a ghost. I avoided my phone, knowing that if he messaged me, I wouldn't be able to ignore it. That night, as I lay in bed, I swore I wouldn't let this go any further. But when my phone finally buzzed and I saw his name on the screen, my resolve cracked. Ethan, couldn't stop thinking about you today. I stared at the message, my fingers trembling. This was dangerous. Reckless. But instead of putting my phone away, instead of ending this before it spiraled, I found myself typing back. Me, neither could I. The response came almost instantly. Ethan, let me see you. I swallowed hard, hesitating for only a moment before typing the words that would change everything. Me, when? Ethan, now. I should have said no. I should have ignored it. But the pull was too strong, the temptation too great. I sent my address, and minutes later, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. My heart pounded as I peeked through the curtain, seeing Ethan step out, his face shadowed in the dim light. I opened the door before he could knock. He stood there for a moment, his eyes searching mine, as if giving me one last chance to back out. I didn't. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The silence stretched, thick with tension. Then, without a word, he reached for me. The kiss was slow at first, testing, searching, but when I didn't pull away, when I melted into him, it deepened, turning into something hungry and desperate. His hands were firm on my waist, pulling me flush against him. I felt my self-control unraveling, the weight of everything else disappearing. Ethan's lips trailed along my jaw, his hands moving with deliberate slowness, exploring, savoring. He wasn't in a rush. He wanted me to feel every second of this. And I did. You don't have to be scared, he murmured against my skin. I wasn't scared. I was terrified. But not of him, not of what we were doing. I was terrified of how much I wanted this. Because I knew the second I let myself have him, there would be no turning back. Ethan's hands tightened around my waist, his grip possessive, as if he was afraid I'd change my mind. But I wasn't going anywhere. My breath was coming fast, and I could feel the heat of his body pressed against mine. I had spent the entire day trying to convince myself this was wrong, that it couldn't happen. But the second he had stepped through my door, every argument I had crumbled. His lips moved against my skin, teasing, making me shiver. I've wanted this for so long, he murmured, his voice husky, thick with desire. I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his confession settle over me. The way he held me, the way he looked at me, it wasn't just attraction. There was something deeper, something that scared me even more than the intensity of our desire. This is dangerous, I whispered, my fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Ethan pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. I don't care. He kissed me again, and I let myself fall into him. My hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, and he groaned against my mouth. Every thought, every ounce of hesitation burned away as his hands moved down my back, pressing me even tighter against him. We barely made it to the couch before he lowered me down, his body hovering over mine. His weight was solid, grounding, but his touch was gentle, reverent, like he wanted to memorize every inch of me. I arched into him, my breath coming in uneven gasps as his hands roamed. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was screaming at me, telling me this was a mistake. But I ignored it. I had spent too long denying myself, pushing away what I wanted. Right now, I didn't care about the consequences. I only cared about the way he made me feel. His lips moved along my collarbone, his breath hot against my skin. My hands slid under his shirt, exploring the hard planes of his stomach. The warmth of his skin made my fingers tingle. He sucked in a sharp breath, his muscles tightening beneath my touch. You're making it hard to take things slow, he admitted, his voice rough. I let out a soft laugh, my heart racing. Who said I wanted slow? Ethan's eyes darkened, and in a second, he had me pinned beneath him, his lips claiming mine in a way that left no room for doubt. His hands moved with purpose, sending heat coursing through my veins. Just as I was about to lose myself completely, a loud chime echoed through the room. My phone. I stiffened, my body going rigid beneath him. Ethan cursed under his breath, his forehead resting against mine as he tried to catch his breath. Leave it, he murmured, his lips brushing against my ear. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. But something told me I shouldn't. With a reluctant sigh, I reached for the phone, my heart still hammering in my chest. The second I saw the name on the screen, my stomach dropped. It was her. Ethan's mother. I swallowed hard, my fingers tightening around the phone. Ethan saw the name too, and his entire body tensed. You should answer it, he said, his voice unreadable. I hesitated, then pressed the button, putting the phone to my ear. Hey, she said, her voice casual, but there was an edge to it, something that made me sit up straighter. Ethan pulled away, sitting back on the couch, watching me closely. No, just relaxing, I said, hoping she couldn't hear the breathlessness in my voice. There was a brief pause. I was wondering if we could talk in person, she said. My heart pounded. About what? I hesitated. It's important. My eyes flicked to Ethan, whose jaw was clenched tight. He knew. I can come over, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Great. I'll see you soon. The line went dead. Ethan exhaled sharply, raking a hand through his hair. She knows. I shook my head, but the dread creeping up my spine told me he might be right. We don't know that. He let out a humorless laugh. She's your best friend. She knows you. I swallowed, suddenly feeling cold. I should go. Ethan reached for my hand, his grip firm, grounding. I don't regret this. I looked at him, at the certainty in his eyes, and something inside me cracked. Neither do I. He kissed me once more, slow and lingering, as if trying to make me remember this moment in case everything fell apart. Then, reluctantly, I pulled away and stood. I'll call you later. Ethan watched me go, his expression unreadable. As I drove to my best friend's house, my hands tightened on the wheel. I had no idea what I was walking into, but deep down, I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. I parked outside her house, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My stomach twisted into knots as I tried to prepare myself for whatever was about to happen. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move, stepping out into the cool evening air. The house was warm and familiar, a place I'd spent countless hours over the years. But tonight, it felt foreign. The weight of what I had done made everything feel different. I knocked lightly, and she opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting. Her expression was unreadable, but there was something in her eyes, something that made my pulse quicken. She stepped aside, letting me in, and I swallowed hard as I walked past her. The living room felt smaller, the air heavier. She gestured toward the couch, but I couldn't bring myself to sit. Instead, I turned to face her, my arms crossed over my chest in a feeble attempt to steady myself. She studied me for a moment before speaking. I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. I nodded slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. Okay. She inhaled deeply. Is there something going on between you and Ethan? The room fell silent. My breath caught, my body stiffening at her words. She knew. Or at least, she suspected. I could lie, pretend there was nothing, but the truth was burning a hole inside me. I don't know what to say, I admitted, my voice faltering. I hated how weak I sounded. Her face remained calm, but her fingers curled slightly at her sides. So there is. I looked away, shame washing over me. It wasn't supposed to happen. She let out a slow, measured breath. But it did. I nodded slowly, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. For a long, unbearable stretch of silence, she didn't speak. I waited, expecting her to lash out with anger, accuse me of betrayal, or voice the hurt she must have been feeling. But when her voice finally broke the stillness, it was softer, quieter than I ever thought it would be, almost fragile. "How long?" she asked, her tone so steady it made my chest ache. I hesitated, struggling to find the words, my mind racing for a way to ease the tension, to make it all better. But nothing came. "Not long," I murmured, though even I didn't believe the weight of the words. She shook her head slowly, a bitter, hollow laugh escaping her lips. "I don't even know what to say to you. You were my best friend." The way she said "were" hit me like a blow, sharp and final, severing the bond we once had in an instant. It felt like a knife slicing through the air between us, cutting away everything that once felt so solid. I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest, desperate for some way to salvage even a fragment of what we had. "Please," I pleaded, my voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted to hurt you." "Then why did you do it?" Her voice cracked on the words, the first real crack in the facade she'd been holding up. It was the first sign that she might be as shattered by this as I was, and it almost broke me to see it. I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. I don't know," I confessed, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. "It just happened. I didn't plan for it. It just happened." She scoffed, her eyes narrowing with a cold fury I hadn't expected. Her arms folded tightly across her chest, her stance rigid, as though trying to protect herself from me. "You're older than him. You knew better." Her words struck me like a slap, each one a painful reminder of how wrong I had been. And she was right. I should have stopped it before it even started. I had no excuse, no defense to offer that could make up for the hurt I had caused. "I love him," I admitted quietly, almost as if saying it out loud would make it real. The words slipped out before I could stop them, and as soon as they left my lips, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. It was the first time I had ever said it aloud, and it terrified me. The weight of that admission, the finality of it, left me exposed, vulnerable in a way I wasn't sure I was ready for. She exhaled sharply, the sound cutting through the silence like a sharp gust of wind. Shaking her head, she let out a soft, almost bitter laugh, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me with disbelief. "You don't know what you're saying," she remarked, her tone thick with frustration and concern. "I do," I replied, my voice more resolute this time, gaining strength with every word. "I've tried to fight it, tried to bury it down, pretend it isn't there. But I can't. And neither can he." My words hung in the air, a truth neither of us had the power to undo. Her face twisted into an expression I couldn't quite decipher, a mix of anger, hurt, and something else, something more vulnerable that she wasn't willing to show. "And what happens next?" she asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. "Do you really think the two of you can just be together like this? Do you think it won't destroy everything?" I froze, the weight of her words settling over me like a heavy fog. I didn't have an answer, not because I didn't want to give her one, but because I didn't know. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't know if we were prepared for the consequences. But I knew I couldn't walk away from it now. Suddenly, the front door creaked open, cutting through the charged silence. We both turned instinctively. Ethan stood in the doorway, his posture tense, his eyes moving rapidly between the two of us, as if trying to read the room. He must have sensed the thick tension hanging in the air because his face immediately darkened, his expression hardening into one of guarded uncertainty. "Mom," he said cautiously, his voice wavering just enough to show his own vulnerability. His gaze flicked to mine, searching, perhaps for some kind of confirmation or explanation. "What's going on?" She exhaled sharply, a sound tinged with exasperation as she glanced at him. "Why don't you tell me?" she shot back, her voice tight, her frustration evident. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he stood his ground, refusing to back down. "I love her," he said, his voice unwavering despite the tension crackling in the room. A bitter laugh escaped from his mother, sharp and brittle, as she shook her head in disbelief. "Of course you think you do," she retorted, her words laced with disbelief, a mix of disappointment and sorrow. "I do," he insisted, his voice stronger now as he took a step closer to me, his gaze never leaving his mother's. "And I don't care what anyone says. This is real." Her eyes flashed with something close to panic, her lips trembling as she looked at him. "Ethan," she said, her voice breaking just slightly. "You're young. You have no idea what you're doing." He squared his shoulders, standing even taller, a shift in his posture that spoke of resolve. "I know exactly what I'm doing," he replied firmly, his voice filled with an intensity that left no room for doubt. Then she turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with an expression that was nearly impossible to read, a mixture of fear, resignation, and something softer, something more tender. "You're really going to do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if the question itself could shatter the fragile thread of hope she still clung to. I hesitated, the weight of her gaze pressing into me. But after a moment, I nodded. It wasn't just a simple yes. It was a yes filled with uncertainty, with fear, with the understanding that this choice could change everything. But it was the only choice I could make, and it was one I couldn't take back. Yes. The word escaped her lips quietly, but it hit me with the force of 1,000 storms. Tears welled up in her eyes, glistening with the weight of her pain, but she blinked them away quickly, as if to shield herself from the vulnerability they revealed. "Then I hope it's worth it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, trembling with a mix of hurt and resignation. "Because I don't think I can ever forgive you for this." Her words fell like shards of glass, cutting through the air between us. They crushed me, each syllable seeping into the depths of my soul. I knew, deep down, that I had crossed a line, one that could never be undone. And that no amount of pleading would bring back what had once been. Still, in that moment, I understood there was no turning back. She turned her back on me, her shoulders stiff with the weight of everything unsaid. She walked away, heading for the kitchen, moving with a sense of finality, as if she could no longer bear the sight of me. The space between us felt impossibly vast, her absence more palpable than her presence. Ethan, who had been standing silently beside me, reached for my hand. His fingers found mine, the warmth of his grip a small comfort in the coldness of the moment. His touch was strong, steady, grounding me when everything around me seemed to be slipping away. "Let's go," he said, his voice low, carrying a quiet strength that steadied my racing heart. I glanced back once more, my eyes lingering on the empty space where she had been, where everything I had built with her now lay in ruins. A part of me wanted to stay, to find a way to fix it. But deep down, I knew it was over. It was too late for that. When I looked at Ethan, though, something in me steadied. This was my choice now. I turned away from the past, feeling the weight of it heavy on my shoulders. With a final breath, I stepped forward, my hands still in Ethan's, the path ahead uncertain but undeniably mine to walk. Thank you for watching until the end. If you haven't subscribed yet, I invite you to subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments section. Thank you so much.